Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I posted a couple of WordPress tips and tricks videos. I hope you found them useful. I've got a list of a whole plethora of tips that I want to share, so I'll continue posting videos on WordPress tips. But before I start those, I'm going to go back to the AWS Lightsail for Beginners series. A few people have asked about Plesk hosting. It's an option that AWS recently introduced in the Lightsail arena. So I'm going to walk you through setting up Plesk as a hosting platform and how to use it to host multiple websites, specifically multiple WordPress sites. I've done many videos on hosting using RunCloud hosting as well as Server Pilot management hosting to create multiple WordPress sites within one Lightsail instance. Plesk is another solution. cpanel also is another solution. I've tended to not use these tools in the past as they were just very expert oriented or advanced oriented, so it was not very easy to get up and running really quickly using Plesk and cpanel. But with this new option that's in Lightsail, I think it's going to be a little bit easier, so we're going to give it a try, and then I'll get back to those WordPress tips and tricks. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, well, let's get started on creating our, and actually, before I create the instance, let me walk you through just a brief explanation about Plesk. So Plesk is a centralized management software for servers meant for hosting websites. So it provides a visual layer on top of the various software components that have to be configured to run websites. It's especially useful for folks like us that do not know or have the advanced expertise to manually or configure the various components via command line. So it does provide us a bit of a ease of use or convenience. So I have a diagram here that quickly shows what a setup would look like with Plesk and where it fits in. So you have your running websites. Underneath that is where tools like Plesk live. Plesk is one of them. As I mentioned before, I've done some videos on how to configure RunCloud and Server Pilot. I prefer RunCloud. Server Pilot is still a good tool, but it's no longer free. RunCloud, I believe, is not free, or I believe there is a free component, but it's still useful for development instances. And then cpanel is another popular web host management tool. All of these are, or at least Plesk and cpanel, are license based, so you have to subscribe and get a license. RunCloud and Server Pilot are yearly subscriptions that you can sign up for. But they run at this layer, and then they manage the various software components. So typically for a website to run, it needs Apache, a database, a MySQL database, especially if it's a dynamic website like that's built on WordPress or Drupal or some of the other open source website packages. And then it needs a PHP, which is an application framework that you can use to program dynamic components functionality into your website. There are some other tools that typically you would need for a website. More common is the FTP, so you can upload and download website files. SSH, so you can log on to your server via a command line and perform actions. Not so common, or at least in my experience, or what I use is I don't use the mail component, but that is a component that can also be managed via Plesk. I tend to leave mail capabilities into other services. I typically use either a Zoho account or Office 365 or Google Suite. I let them run that for me, and I'll explain when we get to that part why I choose not to do mail hosting on myself. DNS as well. I don't choose to host DNS on my server as well, mostly because it's just another management that I don't want to worry about, and I let others manage it. In our tutorial here, I will not be setting up DNS on the server, and for that matter, I will also not be setting up the mail in our tutorial. I'll explain services that you can go sign up for in both of those cases, and then of course the underlying Linux operating system. So just wanted to give you a brief overview about where Plesk resides and why you would want to use it. As I mentioned in the intro, that Lightsail or AWS recently introduced a hosting option with or an instance that you can create with Plesk hosting software installed. However, that version of Plesk is a limited version. It's not a great package to use, in my opinion. But basically, what it is it's the Plesk Web Admin SE. It's meant to be used for development purposes. It's not something that you would want to use for production, or if you're hosting websites for your customers, then obviously you may not want to use this. But basically, the magic number is 3. So you can't host anything more than 3 of domains, domain aliases, mailboxes, mail accounts, user accounts, or web users. So if you're using it for development purposes, I think that's probably going to be enough. Intending to put this in a production environment where you host websites for your clients or your customers, or you have more than 3 websites of your own that you want to host, then this will not work. There is a feature, I guess it's a Plesk feature called Wordpress Toolkit. Wordpress Toolkit seems to be a management layer for you to be able to manage multiple WordPress sites, and you can manage things like upgrading the plugins, upgrading WordPress, upgrading themes, turning off certain features of WordPress for each instance. You don't have to go into WordPress admin panel. You can do that through this WordPress Toolkit. However, the free version of Plesk that comes with Lightsail has a lot of these features disabled. I guess it's good for development purposes, but I would, after I've played around with this, to me, RunCloud is still the superior product over Plesk. All right, well, with that out of the way, let's get started with setting up our Plesk instance. So come into your Lightsail dashboard. If you haven't signed up for Lightsail, one of my first videos walks you through setting up an AWS account, setting up a billing account, and then coming over to the Lightsail homepage. So you may want to go look at that to walk you through setting up your initial AWS account. But if you already have it, then click on Create Instance. We'll leave a lot of these default, but you could, if you want, choose to select a different zone, different region based on your needs. Let's select Linux, Unix, App and OS, and the new one is Plesk hosting stack on Ubuntu. Choose our instance plan. Plesk is another application that is going to run on your server and take up some of these resources. So there's probably a minimum requirement. So you have to go, the lowest is the $5. Our demo purposes, we'll select the $5. Give your instance a name. I'll leave the default and I'll let it go ahead and create the instance. While it's doing this, let's go ahead and create a static IP. And once the instance is up and running, we'll attach the IP address to our instance. We have it up and running now, so let's go ahead and attach our IP address to the instance and then hit attach. So now the instance is up and running. Plesk is installed. So the first thing within the instance, what kind of ports that have been enabled. So if you look under Networking tab, once you get into your instance, because we chose Plesk, it has opened up a various amount of ports that is needed by Plesk to run. And a couple of extra ports that Plesk needs so that we can access its management console through the web interface. A couple of ports that I don't see on here. If you choose to host mail on your server, then you'll need some ports open for that. Also, the FTP port is not on here, 21. So you'll need to add that port if you need to use FTP services on your server. All right, it looks like the server is ready, and it's allowing me to SSH in, run a command that will enable our Plesk login. Sudo Plesk login. Once you run this, generate a link, a one-time link that will help us set up our admin account. So we'll click on the one with the host name and then copy that. Copying and pasting from this console is always tricky. And there we go. Load this up in the browser. And you'll get an SSH warning. Click on Advanced, Proceed, or SSL warning. I think I said SSH. All right, so you should all see a Welcome to Plesk screen. This is where we will set up our admin account. So put in an email and a password. There we go. So it'll take a minute or so while it initializes and sets up our various services. All right, so once Plesk has finished the initialization, you should come to this screen where you're ready to add a domain. So let's go ahead and add the domain. So before we actually add a domain, let me show you a couple of things inside of Plesk. So under Tools and Settings are various configurations that you can do for your Plesk server. A couple of things that I wanted to show you is under Services Management. If you're running into some issues in the event you need to restart some services, you can do that here. You can turn off some services that you will not use. So that's always good, preserving your resources. And also, if for security purposes, you don't want to leave services open that can be attacked. Another item in here that I saw useful was, of course, just under same thing under server management, you can restart the server, shut down the server, firewall. So here you'll see various firewall ports or firewall services that are allowed in to the server. Same thing here as well is, if you're not going to use a mail service, then you may want to turn these off. Most likely you'll want to turn this one off. You can modify the Plesk rules. Let's see if I click on here. Okay, go ahead and deny. And you'll do the same thing by going into these services and denying them. So just to keep your server a bit more secure and not vulnerable to hack attempts. Apply the changes, activate those changes. There we go. So now we have these secured furthermore. And then server settings. One thing here is you could switch this to a domain name. So if you have a primary domain that you will be pointing to this Plesk instance, you can put that domain name here, and then you can use that domain name to access the Plesk interface instead of accessing the one that we use right now. Totally optional, it's up to you. Another item down here that you could also configure is if you add domains, what will be the preferred domain for the website? You could configure it to be just the primary domain or the top level domain without the www, or you can say, yes, I want www in the domain for the website. Let's go back to websites and domains. Let's go ahead and add our first domain. I'm going to use a sample domain that I have. Keep it with a shared IP address, give it a username and a password. Repeat the password. And when you use one thing I noticed that this Let's Encrypt SSL installation on the adding a new domain page doesn't really work that well, because one is we don't have this domain name pointing to this IP address. We haven't made that change yet in our DNS settings. We'll leave this unchecked and go back in after the fact once we have the DNS configuration done. And then your files to copy to hosting. I haven't used this, but if you need Git support and want to be able to deploy files through a service like GitHub, you can enable Git support. Okay, well, the website is set up. Once it is, you'll see this screen. You may see this warning, may not. Pretty sure you probably will see this warning. My domain is not resolving to the IP address of this server. Instead, it's going to some other IP address. So we'll need to correct that so that it's pointing to our IP address here. A couple of options there. One, if you purchase your domains through a registrar that provides free DNS hosting, we could go there and basically point the domains or subdomains that we want to this IP address, create A records at the registrar. So I use name.com for most of my domain management. So you could come in here if you're using this, or if you use GoDaddy or Google Domains or any of domain registrars that are out there, you would go into the DNS management portion of that service, and then you can type in. So for example, we could put in the IP address here. You could do it that way. That's probably the most easiest route, and I kind of prefer that as well, keeping my domain or DNS management separate from the server that's hosting the website. Another option is to host the DNS capabilities on Lightsail. If you go back to your Lightsail dashboard, click on Home, click on Networking, you can create a DNS zone here. And here you would have to enter the domain name and then create a DNS zone. Allow us to use Amazon's Route 53 DNS service. I'm going to show you using Lightsail. What we'll do here is go ahead and put on our DNS creation page, put our domain, create a DNS zone, and then the next step, come back to your DNS registrar, go to manage name servers, and this will again be a little bit different for different registrars, but you'll want to modify the name servers. We'll add another one. We have our 4, apply the changes, and they are successful. It may take up to 24 hours. Usually it's less than that. Sometimes it's even as quick as a few minutes. Let's check where ours are. But before we do that, let's go ahead and add a couple of items here. Let's go ahead and add the IP address. So we will add an A record, put an @, and then pick your IP address. And in this case, we didn't even need to type in the IP address. The Amazon's DNS systems already detected we had a static IP as part of our Lightsail configuration. Let's go ahead and add one more, www, and pick our static IP address. So other things that you'll want to do is if you wanted to add Cname, so if you needed another subdomain and you wanted to point it to the main www, you can enter a Cname record. For mail services, you can enter the MX records. And then a couple of other types of records you could enter if your services needs it. And then a TXT record. We'll use a TXT record here shortly for the Let's Encrypt authentication. One of the tools I like to use is DNS. If you search for DNS propagation, dnschecker.org. I like to use that one. It's pretty reliant and has a pretty good interface. So if we do www.mukesh.me and hit search, you'll see that it's still pointing to my old IP address throughout the internet, all the DNS servers. We can test the root, and it's still pointing to some old IP addresses. So we'll give it maybe an hour or two. You can continue to check this on your own when you're putting up your own domain on Plex, and as soon as you start to see, at least in the country you're in, you start to see the new IP address, then you can proceed with configuring your website. All right, so my DNS propagation mostly is completed, and so we can proceed forward to install an SSL certificate and set up a WordPress site. So let's do the SSL certificate. As many of you may know, there is a free option. You can also go with a paid option to get an SSL certificate for your domain. Let's go ahead and click on get it for free. We'll put our email address. We'll select secure the wildcard domain, include the www subdomain, and secure the webmail domain. We don't need this one in our tutorial here, but it's already pre-checked once you secure the wildcard. Click on get it free. Going to ask us for setting up a TXT record on our DNS zone. That way Let's Encrypt can verify that it was a valid request and can issue the certificate to us. So it asks here is that create a DNS record with a record type of TXT. The domain name should be _acme-challenge dot your domain name, and then a dynamic value for the record so they can verify it. So let's go ahead and create that. Select your domain. This will be done in the Amazon Lightsail, AWS Lightsail DNS configuration, since that's what we ended up using for our DNS hosting. If you continue to use your registrar's DNS hosting or somewhere else, you'll want to go there to set up this record. Add a record, TXT, Acme Challenge. We'll go back to pick up the dynamic string. And there we go. We can also verify this is good by going again to our DNS propagation link that I showed you guys earlier. We can type in Acme Challenge or _Acme-challenge.mukesh.me. And this is a TXT record. And let's see if it's already working. All right, it's already working. So let's go ahead and reload. Perfect. Okay, so our SSL certificate is configured and our domains are now secured. Every 90 days you have to either renew or they will let it expire and delete it from their system. So when the expiration date reaches, you want to go ahead and have some sort of an automation routine that renews that certificate. Here I think it says it's valid to May 2nd and will be automatically renewed. We should be able to load mukesh.me, and there you go. This is just a landing page that gets configured if you don't have a website set up on your domain yet, seems like, by Plex. And if you click on here, connection is secure. So our certificate is configured and ready to go. So let's go ahead and do the next step of setting up our first website on here. And with Plex, it makes it very easy. Typically in the, if you didn't have a management console or management software to manage your hosting, you would have to go and get the WordPress. If you were installing WordPress, you would have to go and get the download from WordPress.org, unzip it, upload it, create a database, modify, and then run the installation to set up the WordPress site. So there's several steps, although not difficult, but you had to go through all those steps to just install WordPress. With tools like Plex, you can install them with just a click. So there's a button right here that says install WordPress. So that's what we'll do. It gives us some options. We'll just say sample site for tutorial. And it will likely just leave everything a default. Let's go ahead and just change the password so I know what it is if I need to log in. Let's see, username. Let's get the username a little bit shorter. And you'll see some database options, and we'll leave those the same as well. And go ahead and hit install. A lot more simpler, doesn't it? Okay, WordPress has been installed. It wants us to install some additional plugins so we can have it running with a few functionalities that is common, but we'll say no thanks for now, as this is really not intended to set up WordPress, but just to show you how to set up a website and a WordPress website within Plesk. A few things that you'll notice here, you're directly put into the, I mentioned earlier, a component called Wordpress Toolkit. I think that's part of Plesk. And so this allows you to manage your WordPress installations. And you'll see here, a lot of these things have a $sign next to them, which means you have to use either buy the Plesk license, or maybe there's a WordPress Toolkit license as well separately you can turn on. But a lot of items are not available. For an example, cloning a site or copying data. Probably backup and restore is a good option to use, although I use a plugin for that. But if you're using this and you use WordPress Toolkit, you can back up and restore. Caching and turning on maintenance mode, I think those are pretty good options as well. You can install further plugins just from this tool. You don't have to go into the admin section of WordPress of your site. Same thing for themes. So you could do a lot of things through this WordPress Toolkit management console for each of your websites. So WordPress is installed. If we reload this page again, now we should have the default WordPress installation, and that's what we do. We have it. So we're good and configured with our first website on Plesk. I think that should be it that I wanted to include in this video. A couple of other, I guess, items that I sort of covered already, but just to say, mail accounts, we won't be setting up mail on this domain or on this server. I would not recommend doing it for you as well, unless you have a lot of other functionalities around mail installed as well. For example, spam detection or virus detection, or a lot of those tools that help you keep your mail secured and safe. If you don't have them, then it's no use. And why would you want to go and manage a lot of that stuff when there's fairly good options available? So we won't be doing that here. What I would suggest is check out Zoho Mail. This is just one of many, but email hosting by Zoho. So you can set up Zoho Mail, and if you want me to walk you through this, please leave a comment down below. Of course, Google Suite, the G Suite, that's also very good and not too. I didn't think it was too expensive. Yeah, $6 a month for a basic one email account, but it gives you a lot of other options for your domain as well. And obviously, using something like Google, Zoho, or even Microsoft Office 365 is going to give you a lot of security and professional level email setup. So those are the options that I would choose. Of course, there's others like GoDaddy also offers mail hosting, pretty good mail hosting as well. So I would choose them as well over doing anything local. All right, with that, I think we are done with this tutorial. If you have any questions or anything that I can help with, leave those down below. But hopefully you found this useful and be able to take advantage with this recently introduced image or capability within the Lightsail world. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon and all the good things that you already know. Until next time, take care.